identify in a moral organic. That's what. Um, they're not moral organics if they don't involve the necessary component of the moral. It could just be a mechanics that's not about thing. Um, I taught this class, or I might have been talking about this, so I taught Intro CJ. Last time I taught Intro CJ in person, it's like spring of 2020. Wild semester. Talk about moral mechanics in February of 2020. We it's about COVID. Like we weren't sure if it was like a China problem, was it a base problem? So what does this mean? Is it a moral mechanic? Both of them, all that sort of thing. And we had no idea what was going to happen. I remember that conversation. Like, is COVID a moral panic? And it wasn't clear. It wasn't obvious. I was that COVID itself is not the disease doesn't have and didn't have like a clear like target. Right? There were sort of discussions about like, hate crimes committed against Asian people. Whether the extent to which that itself became a moral panic, I think it kind of didn't the question. Like, I don't think it happened all that often based on the available data. But in any event, so it's like the response. I mean, that was a problem. That's a politician like February of 2020 response. It's like a rampant hate crimes against Asian people in big cities, right? All the people are talking about things like that. That's what Nancy Pelosi is talking about in the news. They're talking about the disease, talking about maybe that becomes a moral panic and then goes away within a month, right? That may be actually a better case for a moral panic than the disease itself, which doesn't have a book number, especially when it becomes so widespread. It's not right. So, what are the key actors in the trauma that is the moral panic? Talk about the book devil and nothing. Not talking about the necessary component you need in order for being moral panic specific. The press is necessary because it keeps it going. The press is necessary because it fuels the fire of the moral panic. It publicizes it allows all of these discussions and builds consensus. It allows all of that to happen. It's a vehicle for the overstated and disproportionate nature of the moral panic. So the press is very important. The media is very important. The public is also necessary. If you don't have people providing the consensus, providing the shared sense of threat and anxiety, you don't have a moral panic because there's no panic. You have to have the public in general contribute to the moral panic. So they're necessary components. All of us can contribute to a moral panic as an actor in the drama of events. So the public is very important, certainly, because the public can have the fear, they can have the anxiety. Law enforcement and maybe the justice system generally can have a role as well sometimes. When there are these vague calls for more control of the thing, more control over the world, you got to run the boat that was. It usually involves like police need to do something. Go out there and find them, lock them up. It can be as simple as that. Like the response can be as simple as that. And sometimes that happens, and sometimes police can play a role in a moral panic. Well, not always. Increases in social control can mean all different kinds of things. But it can mean an amplified criminal justice response. So police can play a role in moral panics. Politicians are really key also. Politicians are really important. As I kind of mentioned, Nancy Pelosi talking about hate crimes against Asian people in large cities in February of 2020. Because where there are political actors involved, sort of trying to score political points sometimes, you can identify that as kind of a key element of the moral panic. Politicians certainly are interested in representing the consensual will of people. They also want to get reelected, and so you have sort of like this convergence of incentives to make that happen. So political actors can certainly play a role in moral panic. One way that they can play a moral panic, play a part in moral panic, is by acting as what's sometimes called a moral entrepreneur. It's a great term, but examples. Moral entrepreneur. A moral entrepreneur can be a political figure or a figure who leads an action group. Moral entrepreneurs lead action groups, coordinated action groups to like confront the problem, deal with the moral panic, to talk about it, raise awareness, and to delegate or do something. And usually that means doing something sort of controlling with regard to the quota. They're used by politicians, they're propped up by politicians, they're propped up by media, and they're oftentimes very important. A really classic example of moral honesty, you probably already know this, is Meghan Kanka's mother and her father, the husbands. Meghan Kanka was Megan of Megan's Law. When Megan's Law got released, now you can kind of see like we have these really unusual, it's not even tragic, but unusual events that involve the kidnapping and murder of children by strangers. That so rarely happens. It's like every parent's worst nightmare, but it so rarely happens. But that's the thing that gave rise to the sex offender registry being public. Like these really unusual events that led to a change in policy that's still there. Now it's 30 years ago. It's a change in policy that's still there. So Meghan Kanka's mother, and I guess to a lesser extent her father started came in the news recently. I think it was like a Cardi B song, right? Megan Thee Stallion. I don't know the killer doing that song. There's like a reference to a law. There was like a law. Anyway, and I'll never read it up. I'm gonna read it up. That I done. Back in one. I haven't listened to all of Taylor Swift's new album. I'm also at my death there. It's a little disconnect. But my news is from 30 years ago. So what we do know is that Meghan Kanka's mother is an example of a moral entrepreneur. She advocated for the state to make the already existing sex offender registry not just accessible to the police, but accessible to everyone else. Because then she would have known that her neighbor across the street, you agree, right? That's the argument. So she's a great example, classic example of a moral entrepreneur. Again, my references to media are old. It's like really old. Any of you ever heard of or seen the musical The Music Man? Any of you heard of that? No. Have you heard of it? Have you seen it? Yeah. So do you remember? I don't know if you remember. Like, did you see the movie with Robert Redford?
Yeah, play too.
Say again.
Saw the play.
You saw the play? Fantastic. With Hugh Jackman? That's awesome. Oh, that's fantastic. My wife was so down. Okay. So there's this song, and I'm not gonna get it. But he sings the song. He's like a charlatan who goes around. This takes place in like the early 20th century, 1912, summer of 1912. And he goes around to small towns in the Midwest. He sells things that don't exist. He's like a scammer. And so what he's selling when the movie or when the play starts is like boys' bands, like boys' marching bands. And he doesn't really intend to teach them music or sell them instruments, or anything like that. He just like collects the money in advance and then skips town to the next town. And he's just trying to beat his reputation. Okay. So then he comes into this Iowa town and he's like, what do I do to like sell a band? His buddy is like, there's nothing that you can do, like nosebleed scam. It's like, no, there's nothing you can do, everybody's happy here. Then there's the pool table that they install, and he's like the pool table. So he sings a great song about how the pool table is going to corrupt kids in the town because they're going to become drunkards. They're going to listen to jazz and all of this stuff. And all the parents freak out and they buy it. They like the older thing in his statement. And who says the town and he falls. He's a moral entrepreneur for his own state. It is fascinating. I love to trade Sandra Rover. You should find the movie and watch it. It's 1960. It's also on Broadway, another standard. Moral entrepreneur. He himself was a moral entrepreneur to create a problem that he solves. But then you think of other people about it. But you can probably think of other examples. So let's go through some examples of moral panics. Examples of moral panic. The OG moral panic example is Muslim violence that Stanley Cohen observed in the late 1960s, early 1970s. There have been other examples that I know. Opposition to alcohol, which was mostly driven by middle class white women, who tend to, in general, this is true historical fact, it's not complicated. I'm going to say it straight face. Upper class white women, in general, tend to be more entrepreneur. In general. That's just, I'll leave it there. I'm not going to comment on it. In general, the juvenile court emerged as a result of the lobbying efforts of upper class white women. So, in general, that tends to be something that is observed. Prohibition is a great example, like the opposite of that. Switchblade knives in the 1950s. You're not going to remember Rebel Without a Cause, James Dean, but there's all this kind of discussion about abuse subculture in the 1950s that came to be reflected in media of the time, including West Side Story. All kinds of examples there. Horror comics, what it's going to do to children. It's a lot of children stuff, like the kidnapping and abuse of children, so like Jewel, 80s, you know, the West End was free. Still kind of in the news every once in a while. Does that matter? As an example, it just sort of emerges and then it becomes this thing, it's topic of discussion that leads to fear, hostility, and response. You have to do something. Dungeons and Dragons, American flag burning, Stranger Danger, probably back in the 1990s. In general, that sort of corresponded and went along with legislative efforts like Megan's Law. The video games, especially post-Columbine, might have been an example of moral panic here as well. A really controversial point is some people have argued that human trafficking globally, especially in the U.S., might be a moral panic. That is a really controversial statement because there's not a lot of data on human trafficking and what it actually involves. So that is a really hot take. And the closer we get to like right now, the more like uncomfortable identifying examples becomes, right? Because now you're like, wait a minute, is that actually a role? You don't necessarily know. So I think the moment that you're in the midst of disproportionate reaction, and maybe disproportionate or maybe proportionate, you don't necessarily know. And you're not going to know until later, after the moral panic subsides. We collect data on it and say that was or wasn't. So there's all different kinds of examples. Leading and there's absolutely a discussion maybe like 10 or so years ago about vaping in kids. That's still ongoing, but it's really something that emerged with vaping technology maybe 10 or so years ago. What vaping is going to do today. There's now discussions about phones in schools. There's all this social psychological research suggesting that phones in schools are bad. And then you have people saying that research is wrong, it's not experimental, not establishing causation. Kids should be allowed to have phones in schools, it's kind of a perspective issue. And to say that it's going to like raising something is immoral. They have two different sides of that. And that discussion seems to be a little bit more radical than some other discussions that are happening. So let's hold this discussion. Are there examples of moral panics, like recently, potential moral panics that you're aware of? And my media references go back almost half a century, as you can tell. From not necessarily like a lot of stuff. There are examples that come to mind, things you're thinking about, or talking about. Yeah. So police killings in general tend to be really uncommon. I don't know if you're aware of it, especially if unarmed. And there's studies of asking people to estimate the number of them, right? Estimate the number of unarmed killings in people in the United States in a given year. And it's way less than 100, right? It's an uncommon thing. So discussions about how much of this is a disproportionate cost is obviously an ongoing conversation. Other thoughts, other examples that come to your mind when talking about. Yeah. Absolutely. Great example. There was a large contingent of people post 9/11 who would not trust military people. Absolutely. And or they would like Honorable Aaron. Absolutely. And public don't remember. Names on the five. Now we got about five. Like perceptions of military people need for the and also it didn't make sense doesn't always some people, sort of like a vaguely ethnic looking people. People who sort of fit preconceived version of what somebody from the Middle East might look like. That's we're American. Kind of spread out. Plus in every region of the world. Yeah, other examples. that comes to your